All right, so let's start working our way through the text. Okay, so verse 1, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. Okay, so again, like you're seeing this situation, and I don't know about you, but like when you see like unfortunate circumstances, like your heart goes out to these people, right? And maybe it happened to you too. And then so what did the disciples ask him? Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, right? Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? I think we actually ask the same kinds of questions that the disciples do. Because what are the disciples trying to get at? Who's to blame? Right? Like something bad happened. Who's to blame? What's the cause? Why did this happen? Who sinned? This man or his parents, right? Whose fault is it? They're looking for something or someone to blame. Now, I'm not talking about like the kind of pain that's like literally directly caused by someone. Like that kind of thing happens too. So I'm not talking about that because the cause for that is pretty clear, right? Sort of talking about these kind of situations where it's like, how are we supposed to process this? It's just there. But still, what we do is we try to look for cause and blame. And sometimes we'll look to God and say, God, why did you do this to me? Sometimes we'll look at ourselves and we'll say, was I the reason for this? I think that's probably where the idea of like karma kind of came out, right? Like a sense of balance in the universe. Like if I experience difficulty, it's because I did something wrong in the past or something like that, right? In fact, that's sort of a little bit like what the book of Job is about, because he experienced a lot of difficulty in his life, and his friends, his well-meaning but totally wrong friends, kept trying to tell him, hey man, you must have sinned somehow. Like this wouldn't happen to you unless you did something bad, and God is punishing you, so can you just admit that you sinned somehow? And he's like, I didn't do nothing. Right? It's this kind of ingrained sense that we have. So what does Jesus say? Jesus says, nope, it was not that this man sinned or his parents. Right? This way of looking at the world, I don't know, like this way of looking at God even, that God would punish in this way. He said, no, that's not. God is not like this vindictive judge in the sky. When he sees that you've been naughty this past year, he's going to put coal in your stockings, right? Like, oh, I'm going to send him some bad stuff, because that's not what God is like. He says, no, it has nothing to do with whether this man sinned or his parents sinned. That's not sort of the cause of all of that, but what the disciples look at, right, is blame caused in the past. Who can I blame? What is the cause for this situation? Past-oriented. Jesus looks forward. Often we fixate on the past and we fixate on blame, right? Who's to blame? Why did this happen? And Jesus doesn't even answer the question, right? Like, who sinned? And like, why? He's like, no, it was not that or that, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. Like, he doesn't even answer the question. He doesn't give another cause. He just says, you're asking the wrong question. If you're asking the question of blame, you're asking the wrong question. He looks forward. This is purpose, right? Like the works of God can be displayed in this situation. So why is it like it goes nowhere to look at the past? Okay, like first of all, it's often impossible to like even try to come up with some cause. Like what's the cause for my kid's genetic condition? Like it's hard to what are you going to do with that, right? What's the cause for like the LA fires? Like what's the cause for like something really difficult happening in your family? Like why is it that I now have a mental health condition when I didn't 2 years ago? Like trying to like all of that. It's like you could sit there forever and it gets you nowhere, right? Instead of being focused on the past, which gets you nowhere, Jesus says, you know what? Let's just not even think about the cause, but consider what can happen in the future. Now, I don't mean to say that we don't need to sometimes process our past, because actually I think it's really good and it's really healthy to do. But just as a stepping stone for the future, not as a goal, not as somewhere to kind of sit and wallow in like how life has been tough and how you've been a victim of many, many things. I think all of us could tell a story like that. And it would do none of us any good. Because you'll sit there and you'll go, I'm a victim, and nothing else will happen. No forward movement will happen. I think it's good to look at the past in order to process, but to move forward, right? And Jesus says, let's move forward. Is it worth thinking about what the cause is here? No. You know what? What can happen, though, is that God's work can be displayed. I used to be really, really bitter about my high school time. How many of you guys, like high school was awesome, it was great, which is fine. I'm not bitter at you. It's okay. Yeah, you really liked high school. That's great. How many of you guys were like, it was all right, like it was fine? And how many of you guys were like, it was terrible? It was a terrible time. For how many of you guys was middle school a more terrible time than high school? Oh, about the same amount of horrible. Okay, yeah. Sorry to bring that up, but I actually really loved middle school. I played N64 all the time with friends. That's pretty much all I did. And then high school was interesting. A lot more kind of social drama, I guess you could say. But like any high school student, I was looking forward to my senior year, right after you finish your apps, because then it's like senioritis to the max, right? Except I couldn't do that because my parents had an ice cream store that they were, mom and pop kind of store, and I had to work there every day. And so I was super excited to have time, and I no longer had any time. I was really excited to inherit my brother's car. My brother had a Subaru WRX. So fun. Except the only time I drove it was to drive to work. Like, that's what I used that car for. And so I ended school at 4:30 every day. I would drive from New Jersey to New York between 45 minutes to an hour and a half to get to the store. And then I'd work until 11. And then I'd come home, and then I'd do my homework, and that was my senior year. Saturday, working from morning till night. Sunday, working from morning till night. That was my senior year. And I was super bitter. I'm like, this is the time when I was supposed to have fun. And I would just stew there. I would blame everything. I would blame my parents. I would blame this country for not allowing my parents to have documentation, I would blame my brother because he was super lazy, and I had to do all the work at the store. I would blame the customers, especially if they didn't tip me well. It's just everyone else's fault, right? You know what? That got me nowhere. That did nothing for me. All I did was sit there and be upset. When something goes poorly in your life, some situation is bad, like what is it that you see? What do you focus on? Are you focusing on blame? Like, who sinned? Like, what is the cause of this? Jesus, he doesn't even answer the question. He tells us to focus on something else completely, right? It's that the works of God might be displayed. It's not this, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now, of course, Jesus knows what he's going to do, right? He knows he's going to heal this man. And you could see how this terrible thing that happened actually will display God's power. Because Jesus knows what he's going to do. But this man didn't know yet, and the disciples didn't know yet. All they know is that this is hard. So when you're going through something hard, what is it that you focus on? Every difficulty, every unfortunate circumstances is actually an opportunity for the works of God to be displayed somehow. We might not know exactly how that's going to happen, but God promises. And actually, the testimony of many who have trusted God during these times is that God's work was displayed. We don't always know how. We don't always know why. Sometimes on this side of heaven, we won't even know how that happens. But then every so often, we find out, and it's awesome. Some of the postgrads, we've been going through different heroes of faith. If you were at the winter conference, we had some heroes of faith kind of presentations and stuff like that, and their stories is just story after story of difficulty, roadblocks, obstacles, things that were terrible that happened in their lives that eventually displayed the works of God. There were missionaries who lost their kids. There were missionaries who lost their wives. And I'm not sure what they were thinking at that time, but But it's probably like this. Did I do something wrong? God, why are you doing this to me? And yet, over the course of their lives, what you see is something amazing happening. Most recently, I was listening to a presentation on Verant Mills, and he was a missionary in China, and then war breaks out, right? Japan and China, and it was just terrible. It's just bodies everywhere. Just war just destroys a nation. And it's like, why is this happening? Well, turns out, Verant decides to go back into China at that time, and then there were just kids without parents because all their parents had died. And so one of the missionaries, one of the other kind of workers, like found out that Verant was going from one location to another location. He's like, hey, can you take some of the orphans with you? He's like, sure, I'll take some of them. In the morning, 126 orphans. He's like, well, I can't take all these orphans. Like, what is this? He's leading them through 2 weeks of mountain roads. And these orphans are as young as 3 years old. How are you going to do that? It's going to take a lot longer than 2 weeks, right? Guess how long it took? 3 months. But he took them. He took them. Like, what is this going to do? How are the works of God going to be displayed here? Turns out, he took all 126 kids to this other place, and then he found that there were a lot more orphans everywhere because so many of their parents had died. And then, through that whole situation, he started working. He started working and bringing food places, starting orphanages. He started orphanages for thousands of kids across China at this time. And this terrible war and this terrible situation that happened, a decade later, you could see, wow, the works of God were displayed through this, right? Through Verant Mills. And this is the story after story of everyone who trusts in God. It's not blame-oriented, not past-oriented, not victim-oriented, but saying, okay, how can God work through this? If you guys remember, year ago, I forget exactly when it was, year ago, 2 years ago, one of the staff, they shared about their families, their family, and a kind of really difficult situation with his mom, a lot of brokenness there. But then after becoming Christian, he began to minister to his mom. And, a lot of his feelings and thoughts were like, why did this happen to me? Why did we have to be in this situation? Because his mom was really unstable, and, they were homeless at different times. And he's like, why is this happening to me? Well, later on, he's like, well, God calls me to forgive, so I'm going to go ahead and try to minister to my mom. So he does so. Well, later on, turns out that his wife, her mom, saw how he interacted with his mom. And she said, there's something about that I need. Because it turns out that her mom had a really difficult situation with her own mom. And they had actually pretty much separated from each other. But seeing how that guy ministered to his mom, she then said, I'm interested now. I'm interested in Christianity. I wasn't interested before, but now I am. How is it that he's able to do that? Because I was not able to do that with my mom. And then she started becoming more spiritually open, and she actually started taking course 101 with her own daughter. Like, that's really hard for someone to do, right? Like a parent to do. How did all of that happen? Well, I don't think this guy knew that somehow, even through all that pain, the work of God might be displayed, right? Don't ask, like, who's to blame? Who's to blame? Don't be stuck in the past, right? Instead, you can wonder, how will God's glory be displayed here? How can I move forward? How can I move towards God's work, right? Because it says, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. We have limited time. At every stage of our lives, actually, we have limited time. I was talking to one of the seniors this past week. You've got 15 weeks left of college. Yeah, I'm sorry. Night is coming. And you're not going to be a student anymore. And that has all the kinds of implications. But you know what? One implication it does have, too, is that all the people that you've been, all your friends, this might be the last time they get to hear from you about the gospel. you've got 15 weeks. Night is coming when and of course, on the grand scheme of things, we're all going to pass, right? We don't have unlimited time. God's like, don't be stuck in the past. Move into God's work. Because we only have limited time, right? As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world, right? How can I move forward towards God's work? Who can and you will redeem all things. Okay, now this is the healing account itself, right? Verse 6 and on. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Now, commentators talk a lot about it, how God decides to heal, how Jesus decides to heal, because he could just say, "Wong," right? Or I don't know what sound effect comes to your mind. Those of you who have watched a lot of anime, you probably have a lot of different I don't know. I don't know. That's yeah. But he doesn't. He does this thing where he spits on the ground, makes mud with the saliva, and then he anoints the man's eyes with the mud, and then he tells him to go wash in this pool of Siloam. I'm not going to go too much into this because I think it's really interesting, but we're not going to go too much into this. But different people talk about how Jesus probably did this in order to pick a fight with the Pharisees. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But my favorite story about this is actually from Marilyn Laszlo. Okay, now this has nothing to do with the message. It's just a nice story that I like. So Marilyn Laszlo was a missionary to Papua New Guinea, to the Sipak Iwan tribe, and part of her agenda was to go there and learn the language so that she can write the Bible. So first take their verbal language and make a written language with it, and then through that, then translate it into the Bible, right? So that's sort of what she was doing. And through her ministry to that tribe for many years, almost everyone in the village became Christian eventually. And there's a lot of amazing stories about that. Except there were 4 holdouts, okay? Now these holdouts, they were the most powerful witch doctors of that village. And the way that they would heal is through spitting. In fact, the word for doctor in that language was he who spits, because that's how they would heal. So then they come across this passage, and they were floored. They're like, Jesus is the greatest spitter. Because they said, nobody in the history of our tribe has ever been able to heal someone who's blind with their spit. But this, and then they became Christian. And so Marilyn Laszlo says, I'd like to think that Jesus put this passage in there for the Sipak Iwan people, so it's awesome. All right, next group of people. So you get the neighbors, right? So the neighbors and those who had seen him before as beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? And someone's like, yeah, it is. And others like, nah, it's just a look-alike. But he's like, no, it is me, right? It's kind of hilarious sort of situation. Why would the neighbors react this way? Sort of a little bit tepid, a little bit standoffish, right? And maybe even more sad, the parents, right? The parents, they called the parents in. Is this your son? And they're like, yeah, we know it's our son, and I can confirm that he was born blind. How that happened, I don't know. I don't know how. Ask him. What in the world? And then we find out why. They feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Right? The synagogue was the center of all social and religious life. The social implications is what caused them to distance themselves from this healing. Did it happen? I guess, maybe. Not exactly sure. Who was it? I don't know. Not sure. Because if they were to move into it, what if there are implications? I see this pretty regularly. If you've ever gone on a mission trip to a country that's largely not Christian, you face this all the time, actually. So when I went to Cambodia, I went to Taiwan, Thailand, there are actually a fair amount of people who are like, I believe this, but I cannot become Christian. because of the implications that it will have on my life. Because my parents will disown me. Because I will not be able to find a husband or a wife. Because I might not even be able to get a job if I declare that Jesus is the Christ. And therefore, even though I believe it to be true, I'm going to distance myself from it. What if going closer to Jesus has implications on your life? What if there is really a God who saves? And what if everything that Jesus said about you and your life is true? That you are a sinner who needs forgiveness. That your life belongs to Him. It's not easy to move towards Jesus when the implications are huge. It's easier to sort of, kind of explain it away, right? Like those fervent people over there, I don't know. So I don't know how you respond when maybe one of your friends starts really starting to get into the Jesus thing. Like maybe you guys went to the retreat together, and then your friend who's totally not really a spiritual person makes a decision, to become Christian. And you're like, whoa, what was that about? I don't know. And then suddenly he starts doing his devotions every day. Suddenly he starts cleaning the room, doing your dishes. What is this? What is happening in your life, right? Suddenly he starts to maybe even start giving things up for the Lord. Starts to get a little bit more threatening, right? Ooh. There's a way that you can sort of distance yourself from that. Don't approach your spiritual life that way. To just keep a certain distance from Jesus because of the potential implication that it could have on you. If you're worried about the consequences, because there will be consequences. Getting close to Jesus will have consequences on your life. Careful, safe, measured, neutral. None of these words describe what a life with Jesus is like. It might be uncomfortable to become Jesus' disciple and follow after him. But it's also awesome. And we see that in the life of this man who's born blind. We see that in the life of the disciples whose lives were completely torn upside down as they went to follow Jesus. Whatever their plan they had for their lives, it's gone, right? Oh yeah, I want to become an awesome fisherman. I'm going to have 4 boats or whatever. Peter's life plan, it's gone. Because now he's following Jesus. It had huge implications on his life. And yet, it was an awesome life, right? All right, next group, the Pharisees. Oh, oops, yeah, consequences. All right. So the Pharisees, boy. So this whole Sabbath thing, just to kind of explain, I'm going to explain, it's what, this doesn't make any sense. And then I'm going to explain it, and then you're going to be like, this makes sense, but it doesn't make any sense, okay? So I'm just going to warn you what you're going to go through emotionally, right? So what is this whole thing about, you put mud, and they're like, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. What in the world? So, okay, one of the laws were you have to keep the Sabbath, right? And so you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. And so okay, what is work? And so they had to define it, right? So they made hundreds of all these cases. So one of the things that they said is work is kneading, okay? Kneading, K-N-E-A-D, right? So if you need dough, that's work. You can't make bread. That's why, okay. And then also, you can't make clay, like bricks, because if you want to make bricks, it's the same word, knead. You got to get the dirt, mix it with water, make bricks. Work. He made mud. Work. Sinner. I told you. I explained it, and you're like, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that's what the Pharisees talk about here. He worked on the Sabbath. He made mud. He kneaded the dirt. He cannot be from God. This is what they're saying. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy, right? So what is this whole thing about, and then basically once they make that judgment, it's over, right? He's like, oh, he's a sinner. He's like, whatever. So it's this sort of like pre-deciding, what you're supposed to see. They had a picture of what the Messiah was supposed to be. And Jesus was definitely not it, right? Because Jesus hung out with the sinners. Like, oh, Jesus, how could you hang out with the sinners? How could you do that? You know, he actually like maybe healed people on the Sabbath. Like, oh my gosh, how could the Messiah heal people on the Sabbath? That's work. So they had a certain picture of what they thought Jesus was supposed to be, and he did not fit that. And then once he doesn't fit that, they just go, all right, he's the devil. He's not from God. And they just pre-decide, right? I actually see this a lot with people who kind of refuse to engage with even the evidence of God in their life. They just kind of pre-decide. Like, oh, that can't be it. That can't be it. So people's, like, is the most hilarious sort of, thing about miracles. People say, oh, miracles are impossible. Well, why? Because we never see miracles happen. Okay, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. Yeah, but miracles are impossible. Huh? Jesus couldn't have risen from the dead. Oh, why not? Well, because it's a miracle. Uh-huh. And miracles don't happen. Therefore, Jesus couldn't. Like, wait, what? Right? It's sort of a way to pre-decide things. And so people come up with all kinds of crazy, like, alternative explanations, right? So, like, how did the universe begin? How do you explain fine-tuning? Well, I don't know, multiverse, something I saw it in a movie once, How did life begin? Richard Dawkins says maybe it was aliens. They don't have a better explanation. How do you explain the historical facts behind Jesus' resurrection? You know what the best theories are? You guys ready for this? Aliens. I don't know what is with the aliens. It's just Deus ex. Anyway, the other one is the twin theory. The twin theory. That's their best. That's their best theories. They're like, oh, Jesus couldn't have risen for the dead. It must have been an alien or a twin, hidden twin somehow. I see this. I see people doing this with God too, in terms of like what Christian life is supposed to look like, what a church is supposed to look like, and sort of coming in with preconceived notions for that. For any issue in church life, I've gotten criticism on both sides. How come our praise is too modern? Our praise is not energetic enough. We do too much Bible study. We don't do enough Bible study. We do too much evangelism. We don't do enough evangelism. So, I get it from all sides. But really what we should do is source our material from the Bible, right? And not with kind of preconceived notions of what it should look like. I think the Pharisees had a preconceived notion of what a godly life was supposed to look like. And Jesus was preaching a message that was different from that, right? And then they sort of got threatened. So they were the religious elite, the Pharisees. They enjoyed a lot of praise from others. And they were also pretty greedy for money. And they liked it that way. They enjoyed a good position within their sort of ecosystem there. Well, Jesus, like, why are you clearing the temple? Why are you calling us whitewashed tombs? Why do you keep saying that you're going to go to the cross? Like, that doesn't fit my picture of what a godly life is supposed to look like. I grew up going to church. I went to a Korean-American church growing up, and I know that every church is different, and it's not like my whole church was like this, but the overall sense that I got from the adults at my church growing up was not that you had to be a very spiritual person, but that you had to go to Harvard. You guys know what I'm talking about? Because the people that, like, they would sort of, were not the very spiritually mature people who would serve, give things up for the Lord, and become missionaries. The people they would say, like, oh, you should be like them, are the people who got to Harvard and MIT and Dartmouth and all that, right? One of the most awesome things about Korean Christians, I think, are their fervent prayer. If you've ever gone to like a Korean prayer meeting, it's just, you can't think, it's just so loud because people are praying really loudly, right? And they're famous for their dawn prayer meetings. Every day they go to church at like 5 a.m. and pray. I think there are a lot of prayer warriors who are there. There are also a fair amount of people who are there to pray that their kids will get into Harvard, because that's their understanding of what this life is supposed to look like. Once I started reading the Bible carefully, I was actually surprised that God's wishes for me are not to go to Harvard and make a lot of money and have a 3-car garage in the suburbs. Actually, God's goal for me was to serve. He wanted me to become a servant like he was a servant. He wanted me to love him and love others. He wanted me to give my life away rather than accumulate for myself. And that was very different from the preconceived notions that I had before I fully read the Bible. So Jesus, right, he didn't fit the mold of what the Pharisees thought that God was. And they didn't want to see anything else. Who is this person? I don't know. He must be a sinner. And they didn't really take anything else into account, right? So I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, do you have preconceived notions of what it looks like to follow God? Where did those come from? I think Jesus gives us a very clear picture in the Bible, right? To do the work of God while it is still day. It's getting down in the dirt with people, doing some work there, being with people, extending the love of God to them and the work of healing with them. But if you're stuck trying to sort of, it's all about that GPA and the 6-figure salary and the financial security, not that those are bad things. It's just like Jesus calls us to something different. I think the Pharisees, they're a good example. Well, actually, both the Pharisees and the man born blind are examples of spiritual momentum. Okay, spiritual momentum. Every decision that you make has momentum. It moves you in a certain place, and it often moves you faster and faster and faster, because we see sort of two divergent paths here, right? So, I actually sort of applaud the Pharisees for a little bit of self-awareness here. Little bit. And say, so Jesus says, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." And some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, "Are we also blind?" Like, wow, good for you guys. Like, you kind of got it, right? And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." And so there's a spiritual progression that we see, both towards openness and towards blindness, right? Because every time the man born blind talks, we see a spiritual progression in his understanding of Jesus, right? He's able to see more and more. Oh, who is this guy? Well, this guy's name is Jesus. Verse 17, he's got to be a prophet, right? I mean, and then he has to be from God. And then finally, towards the end, he calls him Lord, right? How about the Pharisees? They start with, this man is not from God. And then they escalate, right? Further blindness. We know that this man is a sinner. And then they're like, we don't even know where this guy comes from. Who's this guy? Raymond Brown says this in his commentary: "An ironical contrast is shown between the man who was blind but came to sight because of Jesus and the Pharisees, or the Jews, who could see and were brought to blindness because of Jesus. The blind man knows little and yet learns much. The Pharisees know everything," right? This is in quotes, by the way, kind of, like air quotes. They know everything and can be taught nothing. Right? And so humility is required to see God's work that's being displayed here. Let's end with the man who was born blind. We see his understanding of Jesus and his commitment to Jesus increase over time, right? And how does that happen? Well, first, I just want to, for those of you who are not Christian and just checking things out, I just really want to commend you, because I don't think that's easy to do. In fact, in some ways, it might feel like everyone's against you sometimes, kind of like this man, where everybody kind of. And so I really want to commend you for that, because I think it's a really amazing journey to get from spiritual blindness to fully seeing who Jesus is. And I'm not exactly sure where you are in your journey. And any way that we can help you, I'd love to do that. But I think it's really beautiful to see like this person's journey and kind of mirror our journey through that. What are some of the things that that helps him on this journey, one thing is just sharing his testimony, right? Because people keep asking him, hey, what happened to you? And then he says, well, like there was a guy, and I think his name was Jesus, and like, I don't know, is he a sinner? I don't know, but like one thing I do know, like he was blind and now I see, right? And then like they keep asking him, and it's like really annoying, and he has to keep answering again, and he starts getting snarky and snarkier like later on, but he keeps telling his testimony. I met this guy, it's Jesus, and like it's just amazing, and he healed me. So just actually repeating your testimony of how Jesus found you. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to know like all of the apologetics, right? How to answer every single question. Just by being able to tell your story about how Jesus met you. I think it's powerful. And then the other thing that helps him, ironically, is opposition to his faith. Opposition to his faith. Like, is opposition to your faith good or bad? Because you've probably experienced it. They do these experiments on trees where they raise like a tree in a greenhouse, right? You guys know what a greenhouse is, right? Like it's like a building that's like lets all the light in and all that, right? But it's very protected. Everything is very controlled. Versus a tree that grows up outside the greenhouse. And you would think, which tree grows up better? You would think that it's the greenhouse tree, right? Well, it turns out, actually, it's the tree on the outside. And the reason is because it faced up against the wind. And whenever it faces up against the wind, it forces the tree to have deeper roots. Deeper roots. Inside the greenhouse, it never faced any opposition and never grew deeper roots. So, opposition to your faith. You might be facing some of that right now. Maybe it's happening through some of your friends, maybe through even your parents. Whatever source it may come from, actually, that can be the opportunity to deepen in your conviction of who Jesus is. I don't know everything, but one thing I know, I was blind and now I see. Right? Jesus healed me. Final thing, what does Jesus see? Jesus sees people in need. And I think this is kind of like the ultimate kind of end goal of how to see. He sees this man born blind, and he's like, I want to heal him. And actually, it's much more than physical healing. Right? It's much more than that. Because you can be physically seeing, just like we see with the Pharisees, but totally spiritually blind to the things of God. Jesus comes back to him later and says, hey, like who was it that healed you? Do you know who that guy is? It's me. He says, oh, and he worships him as Lord, right? Jesus wants to heal everyone, not only of their physical blindness, but of their spiritual blindness. How do you see people around you? There are so many people around us who are spiritually blind. And because they are spiritually blind, they cannot see the only source of true healing in their lives. Jesus. What has God called us to do? To walk alongside him, to follow him, right? To see the world as he sees the world. And to bring the only source of true healing to people's lives. So I want to take a moment to pray. If I can ask the band to come up. We talked through a lot of different ways to see, right? It's a text on healing, and only 2 verses are on the healing because it's all about your response to that. I think in this room, there are many people actually who've experienced a lot of healing in their lives. And I think the question that you have to answer is, what's your response to that? Maybe you're worried about the consequences, like the parents. Maybe you're threatened by what it looks like to follow Jesus. Maybe you're sort of stuck in the past, in terms of blame and cause. Wherever you are, I think the man born blind shows us that progression is possible. He sees who Jesus is slowly, little by little. Every single time, he understands a little bit more about Jesus. He shares about who he is, and he learns a little bit more about who he is. So I just want you to consider, what is it that you see? How do you see? Maybe there are also some people in your life who might need a little bit of love, who might need a little bit of spiritual healing in their lives. And maybe what God is calling you to do is to see the world like he sees the world and to be an agent of healing in their lives by bringing about the only source of true healing. And so I just want you to pray wherever you are and pray a response to God. God's word always calls us to respond. To not respond is a response too, right? Like the Jews who sort of like kind of looked at stuff and they maybe even said some stuff that made sense but didn't actually move towards anything. Let's pray.